Okay, cool. I think the recording got started. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for coming today. So today we're going to be talking about technical communication. This is really more so going to be focused like on the lens of like the first week of your internship more so than like regular technical communication, I guess. We want to make sure you get off to a good start your first week and you feel confident going into your internship. So we're going to talk about like some of the things you do that first week, kind of things that are a little bit important. We're gonna like cover like kind of what you should be doing your first week even. That's gonna depend like employer to employer, but there are like a couple of basic things that I find in like every internship, at least I've had or job I've had, that usually like I do in my first week. So I kind of compiled a few of those and we'll talk about those today. We'll also talk about like kind of a little bit of corporate lingo. So like things like one-on-one documentation, like we'll kind of talk about those because those are really important things you're going to do in your internship. And usually like those things don't really get explained to you. They're kind of like something that I feel like when you enter the corporate world, you kind of have to like inherently understand. So we'll kind of be going over the things that like don't you kind of are expected to like inherently know, but like don't really get taught to like in the corporate space. So we'll like go over those before you enter your internship. So it's a little bit less scary, especially for those of you who are interning for the first time. It can be really like intimidating. You kind of get a lot thrown at you at once. So hopefully this presentation will help you to kind of know a little bit more on kind of what to expect going in and kind of how to best like communicate with the team that you're going to be working with or the people you're going to be working with. That's going to be really important. So, like I said, like technical communication is the ability to clearly explain your technical ideas, work, and decisions. This is really important because during your internship, you're kind of gonna have to kind of explain what you're doing to people, right? Like it's not gonna be like it's gonna be a little bit like the summer boot camp, but it's gonna be a bit different, and that's like in a corporate context. And the way that you make decisions has to clearly be outlined. So. This can take place in a few different forms. So like during your boot camp, it mostly took place like in the form of like maybe like spoken, like you talked a lot to your teammates and stuff, right? That looks a little bit different in the corporate sphere when you have a manager and when you have like a team that you're working with that depends on you to get work done. It's going to look a little bit different. Communicating with your team is probably going to be the thing that looks the most similar. But communicating with the manager might be new to a lot of you. And like also communicating through like the written word. Like in the boot camp, we had you write like some stuff, but like in an internship, you might want to go on a deeper level than when you did in the boot camp so that you could clearly describe the decisions that you're making and such. So really the focus of this technical communication is going to be like how well you communicate with others. Like that's going to be really important in your internship. And we'll kind of go over like all those different ways. So like I said, like there's kind of that spoken and that written communication that we'll go over today. So why is it important? So especially with your internship, this is going to be super important because you only have 210 hours for your internship. I know that kind of seems like a lot, but it really like it really isn't. Like most internships are usually like 40 hours a week for 12 weeks. You kind of got that cut in half. So we really want to make sure you're optimizing your time as an intern and you get like the most done. You get the most out of it that you can. We really want you to think about what you want to prioritize in it as an intern. Really, when you're an intern, I think it's a great time to kind of do exploration to figure out what you want to do. So, like, that's what we want you to take advantage of is like these 210 hours. Like, yes, get the work get the work that you're assigned done, but also do some of this like prioritization, like figure out like, hey, like maybe there's a person at the company you really want to like network with and talk to. And learn more about their role, even though they might not necessarily be aligned with yours. Taking time to like do those things is going to require like those really good communication skills and really good time management skills. It's really important that you kind of know what you want going into this. And also, it's important because you want to avoid working on the wrong work. This is actually really easy to do. In an internship, you like you want to make sure that you and your manager are on the same page about what is important to be completed in your internship from day one, especially because you have more of a condensed internship than most do. You want to make sure that like you are both on this kind of, you both agree on what can be completed in that time, like very quickly. And having good technical communication skills can really help with that. Getting unstuck quicker, like especially because again, you have very limited time. So being able to get unstuck quickly is going to be like really important in your internship. Like making sure that you yeah, like yes, you can get stuck on things, but making sure that like you kind of have a plan to get unstuck. And that like and getting unstuck comes with communication with your teammates. Like when you get stuck, being able to like communicate the issue in a clear way is going to really help you through your internship. And also receive better feedback. This is like all about your growth and development. So really like focus on that communication so that you can kind of get better feedback from your boss about like especially about those like looking at those skills you want to improve through the internship, right? You're probably going into this maybe thinking about a few things that you want to learn or a few things that you want to improve. Being able to like kind of customize that, like getting that, you could get better feedback if you kind of know what you want like going into it. So today we're kind of going to be covering like a few different things. So the first thing is like kind of the skill inventory, and that's kind of figuring out what you want from the internship. So some of you might have a good idea already of what you want going into this, but like some of you might not as much. So this like skill inventory is going to help you with that. Your first week, so this is going to be really important. This is kind of like I've kind of collected some like action items you can do on your first week, kind of regardless of where you go. There are like a few major things that you should be doing your first week, or your first few weeks on an internship to really set yourself up for success. One-on-ones. So this is like kind of that corporate lingo that I said. Like one-on-ones might be a term that some of you have heard before, some of you might not have. It's basically like a time where you get to talk like one-on-one with a colleague. Usually it's your manager that you do the one-on-ones with. Um, so it's really good to kind of get like, I'm gonna give a bit of a primer into that because actually for me it was very difficult to know what to do with those one-on-one times. It was something that like I kind of had to learn. Um, I didn't actually really learn how to do it properly, like I feel like until a few years into my career. So we're gonna go over that so like you can make the most out of this in your internship. Documentation. That's another thing we're kind of gonna go over. You probably come like across this word before, like kind of documentation before, the word, but we're kind of gonna go over like what this looks like in a corporate context usually, and why it's useful in the corporate context as well. And asking for help. This is going to be a major one. Again, like I said, you want to make sure you get unstuck. So I have like some general tips here. It's really going to depend like on your internship and like the dynamics between kind of with your coworkers. It's going to really depend on how you ask for help, but I have like a few general tips that I've kind of outlined. So first for the skill inventory, what I think is really good to do before you start like on a new experience is trying to figure out like kind of what you want, like what your strengths and weaknesses are going into this, right? Um, this is kind of a little thing. Like, this is something I actually did when I was working as a software engineer. It wasn't exactly this. It was like a multiple choice assessment that we took, but like I tried to kind of capture it kind of like this. I kind of tried to capture it in this like 6-page document that like I came up with. So kind of evaluate like what I want you to do before your internship is try to evaluate those technical skills. Like what technical skills are you really strong in? What are some that like you kind of might want to strengthen through this internship? Like maybe you can talk, this could be like a talking point with your manager where you're like, oh, like maybe I really want to strengthen like my Python skills. Is there like an opportunity to do that through this internship? That's really a really good thing to bring up. Like any areas you're concerned with going into the internship is also like another thing to think about. So you can kind of like realize that early and realize like that those areas might be areas where you want to seek extra help early on and kind of thinking about how you could strengthen those like weaknesses through your internship. That's going to be really like all of this reflection is going to be really important to help you succeed and like also be a better communicator because like when you know what you want, like that's kind of like half the battle. Like making sure you know what you want before you go into the internship, what you want out of this experience is going to be really important. And another thing we're going to focus on is those professional skills. So this is more of like the behavioral that we talked about, right? So this is it's kind of hard to kind of quantify those behavioral skills. So I kind of put some questions down. You're gonna rank them 1 through 5, and you're gonna have like a score. Basically, at the end, you should have a score out of 20. Those the areas that like have a lower score are going to be those areas that you might be a little bit weaker in, and that's okay. That this is like totally normal to kind of be weak in some of these areas. Like for asking for help, I know I was really weak in this when I first started. And it took a lot of time for me to kind of get better in this area. And also, what's another area? Like the feedback one was something I also like struggled with. So it's okay if you kind of struggle in a few of these areas. That's totally normal and like something you can kind of look to improve in your internship. And for example, like if you're really bad at asking for help, like kind of make sure to keep track of like those times when you do ask and like how you ask and things like that. That's going to be really important. Maybe with communication, you usually tend to stay like really quiet or you tend to like put things off for later, like in terms of communicating. Like it's good to kind of recognize those before the internship so you can kind of break those patterns and try to be like a bit more proactive, right? So this assessment will kind of help you figure out those weak areas and definitely feel free to like chat with me about this if there are some areas where you're not really sure where to improve. That's kind of what I'm here for, is to try to like help you improve through the internship in some of these areas, and we could definitely have a conversation about that. So also with the assessment, make sure you avoid marking areas with 3. We kind of want to have, because if you mark everything a 3, then everything's going to kind of look equal. We want to kind of like see where those skills lie, and putting it at a 3 can kind of it's kind of like depending on the situation. I think that could definitely go for some skills, but it's better to kind of like put like maybe a 2 or a 4. So you could get a better measurement of like where you stand in that skill. So let's move on. So this is like something you want to complete before your internship starts. I know some of you are starting on Monday, so like definitely if you want to try to do this over the weekend, would definitely recommend just so you can kind of get like kind of reflect on like what you want before you walk into your first day. Because your first day and your first week are going to be really busy. There's going to be, so moving on to your first week, there's going to be a lot of different priorities. I actually have a to-do list of kind of all those different priorities that you're gonna like you will generally run into on your first week. Again, this is not a perfect list. This is for some of you, like you might not have to do some of the stuff on this list, or you might have already done it. Um, and that's totally fine. So not all of the items on the list are going to apply. So what I recommend, this is a Google Doc, is making a copy of this and kind of editing it with your own. You all should have access to it. Just make a copy of this and just edit what you need to, like kind of what that kind of edit is you go along on like your first day and your first week, to reflect like what you're supposed to be doing. Because there's a lot of things that you typically do on that first day, and your first week. So you should like the first thing you should prioritize is like meeting with your manager, meeting with your teammates if you have any. It depends on the company. Like some of you are working at smaller companies, so your manager might be like the one person that you're really working with. But if you're a larger company, definitely get to know your teammates. Um, Getting any tech tools that you need for your internship set up. This is going to look very different for all of you because all of you are kind of working in different spaces. So those tech tools really might differ between those internships. Editing or making documentation, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit. And starting on your first task. So this is like, I'll quickly go over this. But yeah, all of this is kind of outlined in there, like making sure you have that access and setup, like making even like things, there's so many things to your first week that like definitely writing it down helps. Like even the little things like getting included on meetings, like you have to get included on meetings, you have to get included on like all these different like Slack channels, Teams channels, meetings. There's going to be a lot of things you have to get access to in your first week. So making sure you're kind of writing down those things the particular things you have to get access to is going to be really important. Um, Definitely like meeting with your manager is going to be very important. Kind of make sure that you're aligned on the work you want to do. I'd say is like going to be a big thing. Make sure that it's like that's the one thing is like making sure your manager is setting you up for like a realistic amount of work in those 210 hours. Again, it seems like it's a lot, but it's not going to be as much as you think. So making sure that you have those priorities right, making sure your manager how often your manager prefers like updates. When I was at an internship, like my manager wanted me to update him like every single day. Like I had to send him an email at the end of the day. Some managers want that from their interns. Other ones are okay with just having like a weekly meeting with you just to check in on you. It really depends on like your manager and how they like their meetings run. So that's going to be another thing that you kind of have to be aware of. Um, no immediate next steps your manager wants you to take. That's going to be really important too. Like, is there a certain task that your manager wants you to do, like coming out of that meeting? That's going to be important. Setting up a one-on-one cadence too. If your manager wants to meet weekly, then like definitely setting up that one-on-one cadence the first week is going to be very important. And also making sure you know like which teammate to go to if you get stuck. That might be your manager, depending like if you're working at a smaller company, that might just be your manager that you go to. Or it might be another like senior engineer on the team that's like kind of assigned to help you when you get stuck. Definitely knowing that on like your first day or first week is going to be very important so that you can move forward. So with meeting the team, you want to make sure definitely first day, kind of introduce yourself in any like Slack channels. Learn kind of their roles and like how they fit into the team. Like what do they provide to the team? Know how the team prefers to collaborate. So with different teams I've worked on, it's worked differently. So some teams like working asynchronously. So meaning that like you kind of just message them if you have an issue, like on Slack or Teams or whatever messaging platform they use. Sometimes it's much more face to face, like they might do like they might do pair programming with you, where you kind of share a screen and you walk them through the issue and you kind of work on it together. Sometimes, so it's kind of usually like one of those two things, and usually like you will communicate those updates during the day. Smaller teams, you might not do this as much. So it really depends on how your team works, but definitely making sure you know this on your first day is going to be very important. Learn how tasks are assigned and tracked. That's going to be really important too. Making sure that you know where like you can find like what is assigned to you is going to be very important. Some teams might not have that as much. It might just be like your manager tells you kind of what you're doing every week. Other teams might have a dedicated workspace where they're tracking what they're doing. So it really depends. Um, and I would say schedule a short one-on-one with at least one of your teammates. If not, like try to schedule a little bit of time with all of them. I found that this was kind of a good way to break the ice when I was joining a new team, was just kind of getting to meet everyone. Just even if it's like 15 minutes on their calendar, just taking a little bit of time to get to meet someone is really important. So they kind of can put it like a name to a face. So understanding the product and business context is important, but it's like less important for that first week. If this takes you like a couple of weeks to get to know, that's okay. But definitely understanding the problem that your team is trying to solve, that slash you are trying to solve, is going to be really important because again, like you're a professional problem solver. So being able to solve that's going to be important. Um, Environment familiarization. So making sure you get that environment set up is going to be like one of the big tasks probably within your first week, like making sure that you can run what you need to locally, because most of you, I think, are going to be working with a code base. So making sure you can run that code base locally and that it works is going to be a big part of your first week. And usually in your first week too, you get assigned to like a first task, so like a beginner task. In this list, like this is where you might want to modify the list. This is really going to depend on where you like end up, what company you end up with, how they give you that task. Um, but you should hopefully all be able to receive that within your first week. And hopefully by your second week or halfway through or at some point you should be able to like complete that task within your first like few weeks on the internship. Again, it really depends on the pace of the team though. Some have a longer onboarding process because of security protocols. So don't feel that pressure to have to get like that first. Some of you might be able to get like a first one task done in your first week, but others might not, and that's okay. It's really going to depend on your company. So moving on. Two, one-on-ones. So one-on-ones are really important. This is a time where you can, like I said before, this is kind of a time where you could check in with your manager. Um, they're just regular, usually like these are regularly scheduled at every company. Sometimes some managers don't like to schedule them every week. Some would rather, like I said, like some like having like daily update emails instead from you. Some might like want like weekly updates. Like it really depends on your manager, how often you meet. I would recommend trying to meet with them weekly. Um, just to make sure that like you're on track. That's going to be really important because this is only going to be like 12 weeks. So making sure you're aligned on like how much you can get done is really important. On your side, there's kind of a phrase that exists in engineering, under promise and over deliver. So typically what you want to do is you want to try to because t like work software engineering work um or data work can end up taking more time than you think. So it's better to kind of estimate small first and then over deliver to your manager than it is to kind of say, like, kind of promise them big things, but then not be able to get that done in time. So kind of make sure, especially at the beginning of the internship, you're being realistic with what you could get done a week, especially since you're only at like 17.5 hours a week. Um, it can it seems like a lot, but really like especially when you're getting up to speed with everything, it's not really that much time. So make sure definitely like don't promise too much, especially at the beginning. Um, Feedback. So a manager is there to give feedback and keep you on the right track. That's really important in your internship and growth. So discussing like learning opportunities that you could take or networking opportunities. Like this is your internship too. It's a prime time to kind of get to know other people like in the tech space. So definitely take advantage of that. Definitely take advantage of like so they have like in corporate there's kind of this corporate lingo called coffee chats. That's when you put like maybe there's someone at the company whose role seems really interesting to you and you kind of want to learn more. Like some companies are really open about it. You could just put a time on their calendar and you can kind of just chat with them about their role. So definitely if your company has that culture, like make sure to ask your boss about it. And make sure like too to research roles within the company that you might be interested in later down the road. Or in general, like if you're pursuing software engineering, but maybe you're interested in like data science or you're interested in like product management or product design. Like you could definitely, like if you're in a larger organization, you could definitely take the time to do the coffee chats with people. Internal trainings, if there's any like internal trainings that you could do that would like improve your skill, that's something to ask your manager too. They might have some training recommendations for you, depending on the company that you're at. So definitely like take advantage of that. The shadowing sessions. So shadowing is kind of just when you kind of follow someone around for a day. It's not really something that happens so much in the software engineering workplace, but it's definitely something you can ask your manager about. So definitely like something I would recommend. And yeah, so we have a guide. So I wrote a guide to kind of those corporate one-on-ones, kind of managing like that first one-on-one because they're like when you have a one-on-one with your boss, especially like when you're doing it for the first time, it could be a little bit like stiff. You're not really used to it. So trying to like think of some questions you can ask beforehand is really important. And also like making sure that you have questions that you're bringing to your one-on-one every week is really important too. Like you again, you only have like 12, weeks to have it. You're only going to be an intern for 12 weeks at this company. So making sure that you're kind of staying on track and making sure with your manager you're on track, receiving any feedback, seeing if there's any growth opportunities. Those are going to be the big things you're going to want to look for in your one-on-one. And also with coworkers. If you have a meeting with coworkers, I outlined some questions here, like you can ask them, because that can be like also a little bit intimidating too when you're going to meet someone. Um, but with your coworkers, if you book time with them, I would recommend kind of trying to like learn from them, like kind of making sure like you understand what they do, um, getting like practical advice from them. Like some of the best questions I've asked is like kind of the mistakes to avoid when like I'm getting onboarded with the project. Like I usually get some really good tips from that. So that's one of the questions I would recommend asking. like kind of what you should learn first also, depending on like where you're working, because some of you might be working on really complex projects that, at least for me, like one of the teams I worked on, we had like 6 different projects. So it was really tough for me to figure out like which one to get to know first, because it was like, very big code bases. Like these 6 projects each had a very large code base. So it was very important that like I kind of knew what to learn first, and that was really important. So yeah, that's kind of a brief like guide on how to do those one-on-ones. You'll get better at it once you get like that experience in like the corporate world, but this is kind of like a good opportunity to make sure that you're kind of chatting with those coworkers. So documentation is really important too. So documentation, it's a written explanation of what you did, how you did it, and why it matters. It is extremely important that a team has documentation. I feel like documentation is not really discussed enough in the tech space. Good technical documentation can really help someone kind of understand your project. It can also help someone get onboarded really easily to your project. It's teams where like I wasn't able to like the teams where I didn't have documentation, it was very difficult to onboard to those projects. And kind of like get used, kind of like be able to set up those project environments. Like for some of these projects that you might be working on in your internship, it might take a while. Like there might be a lot of steps involved in getting it up and running locally. So making sure that like there's some place where that is written down is really important. And so going back to like that technical to-do list, like your first week list, like a great first thing you could do at your internship that will really impress your manager is if you come up with like a setup guide for your project. Um, Setup guides are really good because some of these projects can be very complicated in how they're set up. So this is an example actually of like a step by step on like installing and updating Git. You all know Git. So I figured that this would be really good. This is some good documentation on like, hey, here's step by step on how you do something, right? So this is kind of definitely the documentation that you kind of want to emulate when you're writing that setup documentation in your role. That again, like every single time I've done this, like my boss has given me like, I usually do update these setup documents or make the setup documents the first week I'm on the team. And it really shows the manager that like you take initiative. So it's a really good thing to kind of show that you're kind of understanding too, like you're getting things done. It's a good way to kind of build your knowledge around the project that you're working on. So just one thing I would recommend for your first week is trying to do those setup documents. And another, so there, again, I kind of skipped a little bit ahead, but there are different types of documentation. So one of them's like like kind of more process. So this is like kind of setup. Setup documentation, any like process that your team has that's kind of like not super documented, like that's another thing that, kind of can fall under those setup guides. Anything customer facing too. You might have like customer facing setup guides. There are a lot of like software engineering teams who have these kinds of documents. And if your team doesn't have this kind of documentation, you could definitely help them out by producing it for them as a part of your first week. Um, so another thing you're going to see is design documents. So this might be something that you do in your internship. It might not be. It's definitely good if you can do this in your internship. Is like basically kind of coming up with like this technical blueprint that outlines like your implementation architecture and trade-offs. So this is like a quick 11 like 10-minute article you can read on how like at least at Google how they do design documents. There are a lot of different companies that do this, but like just outlining your project I think at the beginning is really helpful. This is something that I've done in the past. So if you want to read this and this is something you want to try in your internship, definitely go ahead. It's not necessary, but it's something that like you see a lot like in the software engineering world, especially at bigger companies. So if you want to try writing a design doc, at your internship, you definitely can. Here's like an actual example of a design document. This actually comes from like the UK government. They have like an open source project. Um, so this is kind of what that this is the Gov UK website. This is like actual like something they worked on. And this is kind of how they wrote. Like they kind of wrote that they had a problem. This was kind of their proposal to solve it. Um, this is kind of like the process that they went to through. This is kind of their process section that they wrote. And like, so something producing something like this in your document, like in your internship, can really impress your manager. Like that is the person you definitely want to make sure like kind of knows what you're doing and kind of sees all these things that are happening. Because your internship is going to be your manager is going to be the one who gives you feedback for your internship. So making sure that like you kind of have all these things is going to be really important. So personal documentation. This is really important. And people don't, I find that this is like another topic that doesn't really get talked about is making sure you're tracking things during your internship. Track your achievements, track what you're doing like on a day-to-day basis is going to be very helpful when you kind of look back at this experience because all of you will probably be updating your resumes at the end of your internship. So having some record of what you're working on is going to be super important. So there are kind of a few different ways you could do this. So you don't have to like write documentation day by day. You can write like you can maybe have a career log. Like you can maybe do a log right like this, where you kind of write out like kind of the most important things that you do in your internship. So maybe there was like you achieved something technical or you got like praise from a coworker. Even something like this can be like something you note down. Um, maybe you got to shadow someone. Maybe you got some visibility. And maybe you attended an event or something. Like any of these can really be like written down and recorded. So definitely like make sure that you have some record of it. You maybe it'll be a spreadsheet like this where you're kind of just keeping track of everything you do in your internship. This can also be used like when you move to other positions too. So this it can be kind of useful. Um, and you can like keep track like again, like it's kind of up to you what you want to keep track of. Maybe you want to keep track of like your contributions during your internships, maybe the events you attended, the presentations you gave. Like at the end of this, you're all going to be giving a presentation on what you did in your internship. That's something that can go in your career log as an achievement. Maybe some feedback you got, or like any important conversations you had. Like all of these can kind of be tracked in that career log. So you might also want to keep a daily log or a weekly log of what you do. When I was a software engineer, I tried to keep a daily log every single day of what I was doing. And it kind of looked a little something like this. So in like I would basically track like in the morning and the evening, kind of what I was doing. So the morning would be so more so like, during the day, I would open this up at the beginning of my day. I would write down kind of like the overall tasks that I needed to accomplish, any meetings I had. I kept a bug log. For me, it was really helpful to write down when I came across a bug. Um, I don't know if any of you will if that helps for any of you, but at least for me, it actually helped to like kind of write the bug down and figure out what was going on and like kind of note the solution. If there was like any knowledge gaps that I had in that area, I would write it down and make sure that like I reviewed that or went over documentation for that area. And any meeting notes too, this can be really important. Just writing down like kind of the meetings you had that day and any important takeaways from those. At the end of the day, I would write down like a little like one or two bullet point summary of like what I did that day, what I accomplished, like any wins I had too. Like if I was able to solve a bug, I would write that down in my wins category. Blockers, like anything like that's preventing me from getting like work done. So maybe like maybe I'm waiting on another coworker to finish something before I can push my code change up, right? Like that's something I would note down in blockers and leaving off. This is going to be really important because some like you're only working part-time, so you might not be working every day. So making sure you kind of make a note of like what you were doing last can be really important, just like as a little like kind of to jog your memory when you are thinking about what you're going to be doing the next time you come back to work. There's also like this weekly log. I found this from Pragmatic Engineer, who's really big like in the tech community. So this is like kind of something simple you can do too, where you kind of track things week by week, kind of similar to the career log, but on a little bit of a deeper level. So like maybe you write down like how, like specifically like what work you did that week. Like if you solved like a little bug, this is something that might not go necessarily in your career log, but it might go in your weekly log. Um, so definitely having like at least one of these is going to be really helpful for when you look back on this experience. I would recommend either like doing the career log and or the daily or weekly log. I think that's the best combo. But just if you're doing some form of tracking, that's going to be really important for you in the future. So like you can kind of look back and reflect on your internship experience, update your resume, and kind of know what to talk about in interviews next, right? It's actually going to really help with your communication because you'll learn how to better like if you remember what you're doing, you could better communicate your internship experience to somebody else, right? Um, and sometimes it definitely gets lost. Um, you like there are things that I don't remember from my software engineering experience, but I have that daily log that I wrote down, and I look back at that and it kind of jogs my memory. I remember more of what I did. So definitely making sure that you're doing that tracking. So asking for help, this is really going to depend on who you work with. Some people will want you to be really direct about what you want. Others might be a little bit more, others like not so much. It really depends on who you're working with. But there are kind of a few key guidelines, especially when you should ask for help. This was something that was really difficult for me, and I think could be difficult for a lot of people who are just starting off in tech. It's like figuring out when you should ask for help, right? And especially because you're in an internship where you don't have as much time, it's really important to be able to identify when you need that help. So one of the times where you should ask for help is you've made progress, but you feel like you aren't really moving forward. And usually like if it's been like an hour and you're not moving forward, I would say like that's the point to ask for help. But it all depends on like the what you're working on, right? So if you're working on something more complicated, maybe you need more than an hour. But if you're working on something less complicated, maybe you need a little bit less. You've tried a few approaches and are still stuck. This is where it's helpful to kind of write it down and keep a record of like what you've tried. So you can see like what you've done with those approaches and you can kind of explain them to somebody else. And another is when you aren't sure you're on the right path, definitely ask for help when you're not sure if you're doing it, if there's any doubt in your mind that you're not doing it correctly, that's going to be really important. Um, and make sure when you ask for help, make sure to describe what you understand about the problem, what you don't understand, what you've tried to change. So again, like writing down approaches of how what you've tried is going to be really important here. Like that's something that maybe you do like in your daily log if you end up doing that, or you write and you document in some other place. And the expected behavior versus the actual output. So this maybe can be like a textual description or like maybe a video of what's currently going on with your code. That's kind of happened with me. Sometimes I wrote like a textual description for someone, but they weren't quite getting it. But when I sent them like a video of the behavior, then they kind of got it. It really depends on what you're working on, though. Sometimes the textual explanation might be more more interpreted than the visual. So this is a fun website I wanted to share. This was something like I found when I was a software engineer, and it was shared amongst my teams was when you are doing asynchronous communication, don't just say hi to someone. Make sure like you put in a request. Um, Make sure you're specific when you're first starting off because it can be irritating to people when you just kind of say hi. This is just something that I thought was really funny. It was something that was shared across multiple engineering teams that I worked on. So yeah, this is a fun little website that maybe you can share with your team or something. They'll get a laugh out of it. But that is it for the presentation. Does anyone have any questions?